Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to be here. I'm sorry that I'll be doing this whole lecture in English. Let me know if I'm speaking too fast. I can slow down. Thank you, МУХі, for having me. It's been a really interesting and I'm so honored to be on the jury list as well and to see the amazing talent coming out of this country. I'm going to be talking today about this term entrepreneur. I don't know if you've heard of it. Some people, have been sort of using it in the industry, and it's basically thinking about the artist as an entrepreneur. But before I go into my lecture, I'll just tell you a little bit about myself so you know who's talking to you. My name is Beichu, and I'm the founder and director of Art Represent. Art Represent is a platform that's based in London, but we work globally, and we're essentially a platform that creates a supportive infrastructure for artists and artists who are affected by conflict, living in regions and communities that are affected by conflict. And the reason I started it 4 years ago is really because I was born in Tibet. I don't know if you guys have heard of it. And I moved to London when I was 10 as a refugee. And I think through the process of kind of being in Tibet and then being in the West and sort of understanding the cultural context and the identity context of where I was from, I realized that we all have these layers of who we are, and we have commonalities that we have with each other. And in a really simple story, I remember being at university and someone telling me, hey, that guy, he was telling me how he really doesn't like you. And I was like, I've never even met that guy. Who the hell is he? Like, why doesn't he like me? And they were like, oh, it's because he heard you're Tibetan and he thinks you hate him, so he hates you back. And I'm like, yo, like, we're in university. I can't believe that this is the kind of reaction I'm getting. So I went up to him. I wanted to introduce myself, to say, listen, I'm actually a quarter Chinese. I had neighbors who were Chinese. I had Chinese friends who spoke Tibetan. Why all the hate? And as we were having this discussion, this English person turned to us and was like, what's the big problem? I mean, aren't you the same thing? And then we both turned around and said, yo, wait up. And we really bonded through that experience of a shared commonality, which is of us being Asian. And so I, realized that with all the things that are happening in the world, how do we get people to see the commonality between me and you as human beings rather than the things that divide us? And I think everyone sitting here can tell you that art is an incredible, powerful way to do that, right? When people see a piece of visual work or installation or whatever it is, something that's been created is so primal to us that I think it connects us on an emotional level. So that's why I started Art Represent. But in my other life, I also work as a business consultant for technology startups. And I give a lot of talks to business people, CEOs, about how to think more like artists. And I thought this is a good opportunity to talk to young artists about how to think, more in an entrepreneurial way and what artists and entrepreneurs have in common. Tell you a little bit more about Art Represent and the work that we do. So yeah, we empower displaced and conflict-affected artists from around the world. So, I think speaking about these statistics in this room is probably more intimate than saying it, say, in London. But there were 70 conflicts listed on the International Crisis Group Watch in 2018. A lot of displaced people, there's a lot of political polarization. As much as Sasha was saying, the art world is unsure where it's going, I think the world in general is unsure about where it's going too. And for us, art has a way of providing a different perspective. This first painting here is actually the border between Gaza, the Gaza Strip, and you wouldn't really, see that until you understood the context. The second one is about art challenging status quo, so saying I'm not happy with the way things are. And this is by an artist who lives in northern Iraq, and he is challenging this idea that terrorists think that they'll go to heaven and have like all these virgins, if they sacrifice themselves for the cause. And he's saying, actually, the angels are already here on earth who will accompany you once you, kind of go on that jihadi course. And so that. And then thirdly, art can draw out our common humanity. You don't know who these guys are, you have no idea why they're wearing those hats and those funny clothes, but you recognize what they're holding in their hands and you understand the situation here, and that's about the commonality, right? So we really look at artists based on their work. We understand that there needs to be an infrastructure to support their growth and to support their career, because unlike the UK or the US or Europe in general, that infrastructure doesn't really exist in these places and in these communities. Diversity, we really look at artists from all walks of life. We don't really discriminate by their subject or by their medium. For us, is being a platform that supports the artist as an individual. And then thirdly, it's about creating a dialogue through the artwork. You know, for us, there were so many different questions and huge questions, and we're not there to answer the questions, but more to ask the questions that we think are important by supporting the artists that we support. And yeah, very quickly, like business model, we're looking at having a global impact by working with partners around the world. We want to look at sustainable economic empowerment. Artists obviously see it, as Sasha said, as a calling. There is a core motivation to why you do it, but we also live in the real world. You have to live, you need to make money, so we want to help artists do that by creating a platform through which they can sell their works. We want to really look at cultural influence, so creating a platform not just within the art world, but within popular culture in general, you know, so for people to know these artists, their stories, their works. And then looking at this idea of an entrepreneur, I mean, you guys probably will recognize his faces up there. You know, you have Warhol, you have Hearst, but you have Tom Ford, who's a fashion designer, and then we have Maria, who's sitting right here. And I wanted to kind of like bring these people up here. No matter what you think about their artwork personally, I think we can't deny that they are successful entrepreneurs, because they are artists who are owning their work, who are creating, who have a canon, but they are also thinking strategically about their place, right, within the ecosystem, about how they are building their brand and how they are positioning themselves. And I think artists and entrepreneurs have a lot in common in that you have a vision, right? So a lot of entrepreneurs are not starting a business because they want to make loads of money. That's a really happy byproduct, but they started because they have this vision. They want to impact the world, they want to change the world, they see something that is missing and they want to create it. They have incredible determination, as do artists, because the risks that you're taking is huge, right? I heard from this investor once that to be an entrepreneur, you have to have this incredible confidence that you will make it at some point, but you're also lying awake every night thinking, I am crazy for doing this. And I think artists in a way have the same feeling, right? Because it's a really hard, you know, it's a really hard life decision. There are people around you saying, you know, you're not gonna make it. Like, you know, you have to live in the real world. Who's gonna buy your work? Who's gonna represent you? So you have to have that focus, and I think that's what you have in common. And, you know, thirdly, I think it's understanding that you're not there to sell a product, right? You are giving a piece of yourself to the world. You're saying, here I am vulnerable. This is a part of me, you know, can you accept me? And at the same time, there is a commercial aspect to it. There is this whole ecosystem of dealers, galleries, institutions, foundations, museums, enough to make you feel really confused. And a lot of artists, you know, I think have this fear maybe of seeing themselves in that context, because for them, you know, what is really important, as it should be, is their work. But I think, you know, for me, I always say to the artists that I work with, you don't have to be that business person. Maybe you have a friend, maybe you have a dealer you trust, maybe you have a gallery you trust, but you have to understand how the entire picture looks, where you want to position yourself or where you are at, in order to make decisions that are really beneficial for yourself and for your work, and to create that space, right? So here's a little graph. So you are the artist, you have galleries, dealers, foundations, individual buyers, museums and institutions, and press. And I think obviously sort of generalizing the different components, and feel free to say you've missed this out or you're totally wrong. But I think these are sort of the major components, right, within the ecosystem, and you are at the center of it. Your work is at the center of it, and you have to understand how you want to communicate to these different components. And like I said, maybe you have a friend, maybe you have a dealer, maybe you have a gallery who can help you manage that, who can help you sort of understand it and help you position yourself. But first and foremost, it's important to kind of understand how the puzzle pieces look, and I think these are the major components. Now, the approach. Again, I think I want you guys to remember throughout this talk that your artwork is the most important thing. Your discipline and your practice is at the center of it, and you have to make space and time for that. But I think, I'm really talking about the practicalities. I was gonna go up there and start pointing, but I can't walk away from the camera, so I'll just point from here. So you have the buyers, right? The people who are buying the artworks that's really making the entire market flow, right? As making everything work and making everything channel. You have museums and institutions who might show your work, and for many, many different reasons that can play a major role in your career. You have the press who's gonna, again, give you that exposure, give you that leverage, give you the PR. You've got galleries and dealers who are gonna be, helping you, but sometimes also harming you because you might not be aware fully of who you're working with, which again is very important in terms of understanding, is this the right fit for me? What am I talking about when I sign this contract? And I think a lot of the times artists, have to focus on their work, so no one tells them that these are the things that they should be thinking about. But I'm always read the contract before you sign it, right? Understand what you want to say to the journalist before you say it, because especially with the artists that I work with, things can be taken out of context, and that can be really dangerous. So we try to give these kind of information and training to the artists that we work with. And then all of these different components will feed into the buyers, the money that kind of make the whole thing flow. But as you can see from the various arrows, these relationships work cross-functionally. And I think it's important to sort of at least get a sense of it. You don't, again, have to manage all of that. If you want to, cool. If you don't, find someone you trust, find a group of people you trust to help you maneuver within this complex ecosystem. I think, with the transition of the galleries, which are, I think, changing in the way that they work, with auction houses that are changing in the way that they work, with social media, etc. I think artists are actually beginning to get more control as well, if you want to take it. And I think artists can really take ownership, of who they are and how they want to see themselves. And I think social media is a fantastic way of doing it, right? Again, you don't have to be the one posting, but if you have someone you trust, someone you work with, someone who loves you, wants to support you, who can be, kind of just posting about your work, posting about what you're doing, posting about your ideas, just recording yourself, thinking about your work, talking about your work, that gives you exposure to galleries, it gives you exposure to institutions. I mean, we now live in a world where if you want to buy something, anything, right? You go on the company's Instagram page, if you see that they have 10,000 followers, 20,000 followers, you're like, oh, okay, they must be legit, I'll buy it. And I'm not saying, again, that you have to think of yourself as a product, but I'm saying have your eyes open about the realities of the industry. And social media, I think, is an incredible, powerful tool, and it also brings you closer to the people who will love your work, right? They want to get to know you. And that kind of feeds into marketing and partnerships. And again, I think the idea is that you are at the center of it. I think a lot of the times I hear from artists, they are losing control. They don't really know what's going on. They're in their studio creating work, and then they come to me, they're like, can you help me with this? I need to get out of this, I need to get out of that. I haven't got my work back from these people. I haven't been paid by these people. And I think that's such a horrible position to be in, because you are giving away pieces of your soul and you are being taken advantage of, and that's terrible. So again, you are at the center of it. Understand the tools that are at your disposal, and try and understand the components that are involved in the ecosystem. And finally, you know, like think about who you are. And this is not necessarily something that you have to work on, but think for yourself, like who am I as an artist? You know, what does my work mean to me? Who am I as a brand? And you know, you have to look at your vision and your mission. And the funny thing is, these are the components, you know, pretty much that I also give to CEOs. I say, what is your mission? Like, what is it that you're trying to achieve? You know, like, why are you creating this work? That's the most important part. Remember why you're doing this, you know? When I talk to CEOs about products or services, as an artist, you have to say, my artwork has value, you know? It's not just something. It has value, it has meaning. This is what it means. This is why it's different. This is why it's important. You have to look at your competitors, you know, and I know that's a horrible thing to say, but you do. I mean, like Sasha mentioned earlier, it can be really vicious, and I think it's good to understand, like, you know, who else is out there. And your competitors doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. You can learn from them. You can work together, right? I think cooperation is a huge part of success. And you know, when you're doing something you love and you're doing it because you love it, working with other people who love the same thing can boost your, you know, your sense of creativity. It can give you more motivation. So I think that's important. You know, your stakeholders, that's what I mean by like the people who are a part of your network that's important to you and your growth and your trajectory. And those are the, you know, kind of blue circles that we looked at earlier. You know, what is your value? Again, tying it back to your artwork. Who is your market? You know, like if you're creating work and you have a gallery, the gallery will know who they're marketing you to. But I think it's also important to say to them, who are you marketing me to? You know, like how do you see me within this whole picture? You know, where are you positioning me? How are you building my brand? You know, if you have a dealer, it's important to ask those questions, because sometimes as well, you know, there are stories where someone else is taking control of your image, of your brand, and at first things are great, and then one day you're like, oh wait, I'm not happy with this. Like, this is not how I see myself, this is not how I see my work. And again, it's important to have this information at hand, because even if you don't want to do this and you don't have time and it's not of your interest, the person who's doing it for you, make sure you ask them, make sure you're, you know, kind of keeping that control and that ownership of your work, because again, it's a part of you that you're giving away, right? Yeah, and you know, I can ask to share these slides later, but you know, these are kind of, you know, steps to understanding your brand creation as well. And I think finally, you know, coming back to the work, and I think this is really, you know, interesting, especially in the context of Art Represent. You know, who is an artist, right? He, she is a political being, constantly aware of the heart of breaking, passionate or delightful things that happen in the world. You shape yourself in their image. Painting is not done to decorate apartments. It's an instrument of war, right? It's an instrument of change. It's an instrument that moves. There is a reason why whenever there are times of turbulence, you know, symbols and artists become leaders. There's a reason why people are threatened by artworks and artists, because, you know, you're a leader, you're a creator, and that is a really hard thing to do, and you have value. So try to understand that you have that value, try to hold on to it, and if you're gonna give it away to someone else, make sure you know exactly what you're giving away and that you're asking the right questions. So I will now open the floor to questions if you have any, or disagreements, or yeah, anyone? Yeah.
As I understood, this lecture was about enter. So how can you don't understand Italian? You don't understand?
No, but she can translate. Yeah.
Так я зрозуміла, що ця лекція повинна бути не лише про мистецтво, а про
про інші сфери життя. Я цього не зовсім не чула, але я розумію, не можна озвучити тему лекції. Міждисциплінарність у житті, щось таке. Мені цікаво було дізнатися більше саме про мистецтво, а більше про життя. Could you possibly
the art sphere.
Which we have long-term relationships, not only as artist and dealer, representatives, or I don't know how to pronounce it, but also as friends and women, feminists, and we have, we built a beautiful exhibition together, and many interesting experiences in our life, but actually you never showed this presentation to me. We just talked a lot, and I feel now that maybe you should open your school even to us, to artists, to kind of get understanding how to interact with their life, with the reality, and also how to sign the contracts and all these kind of things, because like several times and the other day I had the comment from one gallery and they asked me like, oh, let's sign a contract, we will support you about life. I'm like, yeah, what do you propose? And very often it's unclear, and the artists are not spoiled with these proposals, I would say. So what is your kind of comments and tips for us to be aware and careful with contracts and daily works even now? Because again, you mentioned social media, maybe it's better for us just to work directly with buyers.
Thank you for your kind comments, and yes, we are long-term friends and collaborators. I think I don't think sharing these slides to an artist is that helpful, because you really have to have the context, and I think just reading it off a slide is not a great thing. I think also I cited you as an example of someone who I think is doing really well in terms of your approach by both creating time for your art, but also understanding the more commercial side of things. And I know that that's not been an easy journey for you. In terms of tips, I think just the fact that, yeah, and it's really hard because you're waiting for an opportunity for a really long time, and someone comes along and says, I want to support you, here's a contract. It's really, really hard to, say no or to question it. But I think the fact that they are coming to you means that you have value. And even if they don't, again, remember your value proposition, that's your artwork, right? So by you just asking them, what are you offering me? Read it through. I know it's really boring, and I know it's super complicated. If you have a friend who's a lawyer, if you have contacts who you can ask, read through the contract, read through all the terms. If there's something you don't understand, say, explain this better. If there's something you don't agree with, say, please change it. Because they need you. And your creativity and your artwork, as much as you need them, is a mutually beneficial relationship. I think too often artists feel like, I'm here waiting for someone to give me a chance, and you feel like you owe them something by them supporting you, but just understand that it's a two-way street, right? So you have as much leverage as they do. Anyone else?
I have another comment. Yeah, maybe
also you have, as I know, you have kind of an online shop or something like this, or store, where you will try to sell more expensive artworks and less expensive. What do you direction in a way to make kind of more possibilities to buy things, to kind of because I feel sometimes that art became very kind of luxury segment or very elite. And for example, in Ukraine we don't have that much before. We have a lot of rich people there, but they don't buy because we don't have this kind of tradition to buy art to support. It's just like something new. And people buying usually stupid kind of posters, ugly design or wrong design, or just piece of shit. So why not to occupy market by affordable art, and how, or it will just destroy art market, or like what do you think?
I think a lot of galleries are now actually opening online stores. You know, when sort of art tech became a thing, so technology startups sort of focused on the art sector, auction art is a really lucrative area, and one of the few successful ones that we've seen in the last 5 years. But Sotheby's and Christie's then opened up their own online auction place, and the statistics that you see are really interesting about more young people who are interested in buying art, the amount of money they're willing to spend. I mean, people are now comfortable spending 5,000 euros or so on a piece of artwork purely online without seeing it physically, which I think before you would have thought this isn't possible. But of course, our mentality towards interacting online and buying things online has changed, so I think that's one thing. Secondly, I think as an artist as well, you don't have to do one thing. I think for me, one of the most valuable things as an artist, and you are an entrepreneur, is that you have so many different channels, right? If you have a gallery here, perfect, you trust them, great. But now, like on Instagram, for example, you can sell directly through Instagram, and a lot of galleries, a lot of online art platforms, a lot of institutions, and also a lot of auction houses get their traffic and get their audiences through platforms like Instagram, which are image-based, and that's perfect. You can even sell your artwork directly from your Instagram to someone who likes it, right? When you're talking about collectors who are collecting pieces, I mean, again, I think about why they're creating the art. I think the reason why a lot of artists create art is that they just want to, but they need the money in order to live to continue creating that artwork, right? And so I think, like you, for example, you make t-shirts, you have some plates, all of these different things, and these are not your artwork per se, because these are merchandising, but this is a really fantastic way to get in some money so that you can create the artwork, right? So I can as well think flexibly and creatively about how you're going to sustain your practice and how you're going to sustain your career. Maybe it's not always about someone spending 50,000 to collect a piece that you've made, Maybe it's about speaking to the people who love your work, who want to support you. There are websites like Patreon, which essentially has been a really successful case, which surprised, I think, everybody in the tech industry. Patreon is a website that allows creative individuals, whether if you're a musician, filmmaker, writer, whatever, and you have a page and you ask people to donate money to you so that everyone can be a patron of the arts. Again, this idea of a patron of the arts has a very exclusive sounding connotation, and previously it's like people with a lot of money is like, oh yeah, I've donated, like 20,000 to the British Museum. But now everybody can be a patron of the arts. I can give you £2 every month because I love your work. And there are so many creative ways, I think, to sustain your livelihood in order for you to go on practicing and creating the work. And you don't have to go with just like one channel. Think horizontally, think really broadly about all the different ways that you can make it. Does that answer your question, kind of? Yeah?
And the question, where is this quality? Who is there, the jury for quality? Who will?
The people who love your work. I think so. Look, I'm not going to lie and pretend that there are people in the art world who can say this this is good and this isn't. You know, you have critics, you have institutions, you have galleries. You know, if certain names say you're it, of course, everyone else is going to agree you're it. But I think things are changing, you know, and again, remember why you're making the artwork. Is it for your ego or is it for your passion? You know, like I think as long as you can continue creating, as long as you can get people to see it, to love your work and to interact with your work, I don't think it's up to anyone to say this is good and this is shit. I think it's up to you to say, this is what I'm going to do, I think this is great, and I think there will be an audience out there who corresponds to that and who can hear you and who can relate to you, and I think that's enough, you know?
I want to know your opinion. How can painting an instrument of war? How can painting be an instrument of war? Really, can painting cause a war? How do you think?
So I don't really take that quote literally. I'm not sure if you said it literally. I really see it as a metaphorical term. I think, you know, war as in like a turmoil or a shift, you know, the leader of a movement, something that like stabs you and pierces you and changes you. I see it in a metaphorical way that art can do that, that a piece of painting can do that. It can shake a nation. I mean, if you look at, I don't know, like the first slide that we saw, I don't know if we can, I can't go back, but there was a mural painted in Oaxaca, Mexico, and that collective, they sort of became the leaders of a movement, you know, because they were painting on the streets when there was a riot happening, and they became this, you know, kind of leader of a movement. Their work became ubiquitous with a specific time and with a specific sentiment. So that's kind of how I interpret that. I think there was a question at the back.
Hi. There is a startup based in Moscow that allows anyone to consume art through a subscription. So to choose art from the catalog, and with monthly fee get like paintings not value to get them for several months, and it's kind of leasing for art. And if they want, they pay the whole art and stay and live at home. And if not, they will change it every 3 months or so. And for young artists, it's like a bridge to get the market, not to sell their art. They can't, but to get the consumer as well. I think is there a shift from owning art to consuming art in that way? And it's going to be a sustainable model also, this kind of subscription.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think the subscription model is really interesting. There have been a couple of like art startups in Europe and the US as well that kind of go about that model. And a lot of the times, you know, you have big corporate clients. We sometimes work with corporate clients who want to just have a different piece, like whether if it's a statue, installation, painting, that rotates, right? So that is changing. And the subscription model in itself, I think for a company or for an individual actually can be a sustainable case, because it means that you have money coming in every month, guaranteed, right? And I think in a way, like, a lot of these subscription models are done by companies that obviously then get the monthly payments. Different companies have different arrangements with artists. But I think, you know, also again, thinking creatively and entrepreneurially from an artist's point of view, you know, if you have a body of work or you get together with a bunch of friends and you have a body of work, you can propose that same model to someone. I mean, why not, right? I mean, what is stopping you? So the idea is that, and in a way, I think is better because you don't have to, you know, let go of your work and lose it forever. You can have money that's coming in every month, and then once that artwork is, I don't know, on someone's wall for a few months, you can take it back again. It can be shared with someone else. I do see it as, you know, a sustainable way of having art, because I also don't think art is only for people who have the money to collect. I think it should be more democratized. But the subscription model, I think, is one model that's changing the way that the market is working. There are a lot of other models. I mean, there are people who scan paintings or scan artworks, maybe even, you know, sort of 3D scans so that they can do 3D printing, but these are all copyrighted. These are all you know, sort of protected with heavy code. So there is a startup that loans people digital works or sells people digital works, but that work is encrypted so that only one person can have it. And I think there are a lot of different innovations that are happening, and I think artists, instead of just thinking these are companies doing it, I think you can again take ownership of that entrepreneurial spirit and say, what is stopping me from finding different ways to get my work to other people, to get income